Welcome to another episode of Code for Thought. The eScience Center in the Netherlands has become pretty well known in the world of research, and in particular research software engineering. Based at the University of Amsterdam, they are involved in a number of projects, and not only for the Netherlands, but also further afield. Take, for example, the citation file format, or the research software directory, or an international workshop on funding research software, some of which I covered in previous episodes. So I was quite keen to meet the people behind it in person. Lucky for me, an opportunity came up in late April this year, 2024. The occasion was the National Research Software Day in the Netherlands, organized by the eScience Center on the 23rd of April. As the location, the organizing team chose the very swish-looking and impressively designed Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision in the city of Hilversum, which is just a 30-minute train journey away from Amsterdam. The media center kind of set the scene for a one-day conference on software engineering and research that wasn't quite like the usual conferences I go to. Just how unusual this conference was is something Lieke will explain in the following conversation I had with her just the day before the event.
My name is Lieke. I'm a community manager at the Netherlands eScience Center. And I'm tasked right now mostly with organizing the National Research Software Day that's taking place tomorrow.
Right, in Hilversum.
That's right.
So why the National Research Software Day?
So at the eScience Center, we organize a lot of different events. A lot of them are centered around awareness of research software or sharing knowledge about research software. And we get a lot of requests from the community about information, like how to deal with research software in the best way, how to make sure that research software can be sustainable. And for that reason, we thought it might be useful to bring everyone together on one day to discuss some of these issues. Of course, it's hard to address all of it in one day, but generally I think these big events where everyone gets to talk to each other are very helpful in, sharing information and furthering the field.
So when you say community, who is actually part of that community? Could you draw a picture for us?
Sure, yeah. Part of the community is actual research software engineers. So these are people writing code for research. And part of the community is researchers who maybe don't refer to themselves as research software engineers, but still very largely have responsibilities that research software engineers would have as well. But also people who are supporting researchers, so data stewards at faculties of universities or policymakers, for example, who try to think of ways in which research can be recognized for other things than just publications.
Perhaps it's a good idea to actually also introduce the eScience Center a little bit. It's been operating since when, and what does it do?
Yeah, so the eScience Center has existed in the Netherlands since 2012. I think then it was maybe 10 people working together. And by now we've grown to be an organization of about 100 people. What we do is mostly two things. We have about 70 research software engineers who work at the eScience Center, and researchers from research institutes and universities in the Netherlands can apply for in-kind support from those research software engineers to help them develop and improve their research software. On the other hand, we focus a lot on dissemination. So we teach skills like software engineering skills to researchers who feel like they might want to improve them. And we spread awareness about the importance of research software for research and academia.
Okay, so it's a combination of actual software development and then promotion of research software engineering.
Exactly.
I find it quite interesting because in other countries you have universities who have centers of research software engineering groups. Like, for instance, I used to work for UCL. UCL has now, I think, a group of 50 or 60 people that are research software engineers that work with departments and faculties. But your center is actually for the entire Netherlands then. Is that the way it is?
Yes, that's correct. There are also groups of research software engineers at different universities in the Netherlands. So we also have that model, and different universities all kind of have their own setup in the way that they arrange this. we like to think of ourselves as the national center of expertise on research software. So if you would apply for support from the eScience Center, it's generally quite advanced support that you will be getting. So we hope that for fundamental software engineering support, researchers are able to go to their own faculties. But once it's about really pushing the boundaries of existing methodologies, that's when they come to the eScience Center.
And as a community manager, could you describe the role for us, what it entails and what your daily work looks like?
Right now, of course, I'm thinking a lot about tomorrow.
Yeah, I would imagine.
But that is a big part of my work, organizing different kinds of events that contribute towards the awareness of research software, or simply connecting different people with each other who would like to discuss a certain topic. So I've also, for example, organized sessions on institutional policies that address research software. I also run our fellowship program. I imagine maybe your listeners are quite familiar with the Software Sustainability Institute's fellowship program. Yeah, so we've borrowed that idea, and we also have fellows at the eScience Center. Yeah, my job is to arrange every year the selection and introduction of the new fellows. So that's also a part of it. I run the eScience Center blog as well, together with 2 colleagues. So we're part of the editorial team.
Yeah.
We try to get content for that. Yeah, provide editorials to support to the people who want it.
And now to tomorrow, the big day. So what can we expect?
You can expect, in part, things that you would expect at a regular conference.
Okay.
So there's going to be keynote speakers. We have Rogier Kievit. He's a Dutch researcher who is very proficient in writing research software. He will discuss some of his work. And we have Bryan. She is a developer at Posit, which used to be our studio. She will talk about her sort of career as a research software engineer. We have some parallel sessions in the morning on different topics related to research software. But we also have some less traditional elements. The afternoon will consist of an on-conference. So hopefully people will pitch lots of nice ideas and do some speed blogging in the afternoon. We also arranged an art exhibition for the day. So there's going to be some artists displaying work that they've made using programming. So, so there's some artists who make art using data that you would use in research as well, but they do something completely different with it. And the hope is that, maybe researchers or research software engineers also get inspired by their methods and their way of using data.
Oh, wow. I look forward to that.
Yeah,
so how many? Too. I'm sure it's going to go very well. So how many people have you registered now?
The venue has capacity for 200 people. We've registered more than that. so hopefully some people don't show up, although hopefully not too many. But so I think we have about 220 registered at the moment. Yeah.
And this is the first time?
It is the first time. And we were a bit surprised by how much interest there was in this. Positively surprised, of course. But we didn't have to advertise this very widely for the event to fill up. So I'm very pleased so far with the interest and enthusiasm that the community shows.
So are you planning then future events as well?
Yeah, so depending on how it goes today, we'll see if we'll repeat National Research Software Day yearly or maybe biannually. But there's a few different factors that come into play when deciding that. So hopefully, I hope we can repeat this because I think it's worth it and it's a good way to bring the community together.
Running a conference with different elements, including art exhibitions, I think is a fantastic idea. The Spotify playlist, for instance, should still be available. And later on, you'll hear from the 4 artists themselves who took part in the exhibition on site. And when I say hear, I mean just that, because all the sound bites you've been hearing so far are from one of the artists that exhibited there, Christian Schwarz. But back to the more standard part of the conference. It all kicked off with a very impassioned speech on open source software by Rogier Kievit. He pointed out the importance of open source software in research and science, but also the fact that it is often underfunded and lacks systematic support. Well, I can certainly subscribe to all of that, and he's an excellent ambassador for the case, even though some of us may have raised an eyebrow or two when he said open source software is like free beer. The second guest speaker, Jenny Bryan, who came in from Canada, was touching on a point that is no less important: recognizing and appreciating the work we do ourselves. Often researchers who code are self-taught, and Jenny took us through how we can better organize this self-learning process. I had a chance to talk to Jenny just before her talk. Hello, Jenny Bryan. Thanks very much for meeting me today. And you've come all the way from Vancouver in Canada for this conference.
I was excited to get the chance to come to the Netherlands, and then I think a lot of the values of this event and the Netherlands eScience Center are certainly things that I share.
So maybe you can quickly introduce yourself.
So I work as a software engineer at a company called Posit, which was formerly known as RStudio. So it creates data science tools. Originally sort of came from the R community, and now I'd say has equal attention on R and Python. Before that, I was a management consultant. Then I went to grad school in statistics. I was a professor in statistics who learned that I was mostly interested in data analysis. And then I learned actually I was mostly interested in making tools for data analysis. So that is the scenic journey that I took to where I am now.
It is quite a scenic journey, because before you told me that you actually started your journey with Excel, didn't you?
Yes. So it was using Excel as a management consultant where I became very clear on the fact that I enjoyed working with data, but I also became very clear on the fact that I probably wanted to learn different tools for it. And so it was that actually encouraged me to look into grad school in statistics.
How does this link to your talk today?
So I think people who end up creating research software in either academia or adjacent domains, most of us do come from a separate domain and through some circuitous route end up here. I think it means most of us don't have a ton of formal training, and therefore we are, even more than the typical software developer, very self-taught. So there's a lot of decisions to be made on a daily basis that you might not have any formal training to fall back on. And so I think figuring out what your own personal policies and habits of mind can be especially rewarding in this career path.
It could also be a pitfall, can't it? So you can also go down the rabbit hole. So how do you avoid doing that?
So something I am actually not talking about explicitly, but I've talked about before, and then a friend blogged about it, is the concept of time-boxed yak shaving. So
okay, you have to expand on that.
Yeah, so yak shaving is this term for when you know you're probably doing something that could potentially be a complete waste of time, or that you're over-engineering something or overthinking something. But I think yak shaving is very productive often to try to back out and give yourself some space to what if I tried to solve this properly instead of my usual hacky way of doing it. But I think to avoid, as you say, falling down a rabbit hole and never coming back out, that's the idea of time-boxed yak shaving, that you sort of give yourself an hour or 2 hours and say, I'm going to let myself just frolic around in this problem that is maybe only tangentially related to what I'm doing, but I think I have a nice solution. And then make yourself come back out after a certain amount of time. But often you do find that you get somewhere productive after that limited amount of time. And then also knowing that you won't let yourself spend all day there, I think removes a lot of the anxiety around, am I wasting my time?
In your talk, so what are you focusing on?
I would say maybe the biggest theme is acknowledging that we don't spend most of our time on the happy path. We spend more of our time on the unhappy path, troubleshooting, problem solving, and debugging. And it's very tempting to think of those tasks as I don't have time to deal with this now. I need to get back to my, quote, real work. But eventually you realize, this is the real work. Debugging, figuring out why something's not working. And then I think the sooner you decide to redefine real work to encompass all of those things, and mundane things like I really need to update my operating system, or I really need to update this piece of software, the less you procrastinate on sort of the important housekeeping, I think, that keeps your systems working well. And I think dignifying all of that as real work is super important to being productive and feeling good about the job that you've done. And a lot of it is a mental shift. Acknowledging that you're not always frolicking around in some green field writing new code. You're often trying to replace a part of a slightly dated but working system and get in and out. And that is all real work.
It is, and I think it's nice that you mentioned that it takes some time in the mental shift. And for me, it took a while for this mental shift to happen.
Yeah.
So when did it happen for you?
Well, it's pretty gradual, but I was an academic for 15 years before I left to work on software development full-time, and I think it was part of that general epiphany for me, where there were a lot of types of work that I loved and was pretty good at, that in academia I was kind of made to feel like this isn't real work or it's secondary. So I think when the penny dropped for me and I was like, I don't have to do this. I could go work somewhere where what I'm doing is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And it is possible for me to be considered excellent at it. I think that was all part of that same mental shift of defining my actual work as the real work. And it felt so much better.
Well, I hope that the next generation of research software engineers has
maybe
a little bit.
Maybe we can help them get there faster.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have to
goal.
mentally shift. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
As I mentioned in the interview with Jenny, it took me a while to recognize that what I did during my job was exactly what I should have been doing. In particular, when I made the transition from being an engineer to being a team lead or an engineering manager in my career. And I can imagine that many research software engineers who grow into more and more managerial and less technical roles might feel the same. So thanks very much, Jenny, for throwing a light on this one. Apart from the keynotes, we had a section of parallel sessions, and I chose to go to one called the National Infrastructures for Sustainable Software. 4 panelists, Elaine, Louise, Roel, and Jason, discussed different aspects of building and maintaining research infrastructure. There was quite an animated debate during the session about the virtues or not of using commercial versus open source software. Take the choice, for instance, between GitHub and GitLab. GitHub, which is part of Microsoft, has become the dominant platform for hosting software projects by a long shot, including open source and research software. One camp made the case of being pragmatic and use commercial software where it can help to achieve research results, but others also highlighted that the use of commercial software may indeed cut out engineers from some communities you'd like to reach out to. And so when the panel was over, I met up with the 4 panelists to go through these points in more detail. So maybe we can start with a very quick round of introductions.
Hello, I'm Louise Besadenhout. I'm a senior researcher at the Center for Science and Technology Studies, the CWTS, at Leiden University.
And I'm Jason Maassen. I'm one of the tech leads at the Netherlands eScience Center and very much involved in the development of the Research Software Directory.
Okay.
And I'm Roel Jansen. I'm a software developer at Fortune Research Data.
I'm Elaine van Ommen-Kloeke. I'm program manager at Naturalis Biodiversity Center, where we build a national infrastructure for species recognition.
So maybe I can start with you actually straight away, because today we had an interesting discussion about GitHub versus not GitHub. We are big on open source software, as we heard in the keynote speech this morning, as well as open data, which plays an important part in science. But then we rely on companies such as GitHub. And I think you made an interesting point. Maybe you can repeat that.
Sure. And maybe there's a fantastic Sun Tzu kind of quote here. But you have to pick your battles. There's a lot of things that we want to do. And basically research also wants to innovate. It wants to create new things. And I think we can actually rely or even collaborate with companies to work on things that we commonly have an interest in, but we can also actually use from each other. And so I actually made the comment, well, I'm definitely, of course, for open science, for transparency and what's being created, reproducibility, all of those things. But for some of the more mundane or common tasks, it's perfectly fine to actually work with a company as long as you have control over when and where you're going to work with them.
I think control of when and where, I think that was an important point that you made with access of data. Because if we go back to GitHub, I think you made the excellent point that GitHub is a US company, it's US based, it's liable or subject to US law, which makes it difficult for other people to access. How can we make software more accessible? What do we need to take into account?
I think the most important thing is to recognize that for every person that you recognize as a potential user, there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who do not look like that person who would also like to be a potential user. We need to remember that we are very privileged in the Netherlands to work in a very democratic and high-income country, but a lot of people who would be using the software would be in low-resource settings, maybe citizen scientists from outside of academia, may have very different uses and needs that need to be accommodated for. So I would say that whatever we do, we need to critically reflect on, are we being as inclusive as possible? Are there strategic reasons why we are deciding for one rather than the other? And are we thinking about ways that we can mitigate that? If we have to use GitHub over another resource, are there ways that we can mitigate that to make sure that the users in countries that are currently blocked from using GitHub can still access the same resources?
The other point was we're now getting software recognized as a contribution increasingly, but maybe not so much infrastructure. Are we having a blind spot there?
Yeah, so I think indeed that if you look at research software development, fortunately, people are starting to pick up on the fact that research software engineers are make an important contribution to science. But there's also a lot of people involved, not directly in the software itself, but really in the software metadata, in best practices, in building communities around software, etc. And giving these people credit for the fact that they're doing that part of the work surrounding research software and not the development itself, I think is also still an important blind spot at the moment. And I think the same goes for infrastructure, right? So there are many people trying to build infrastructure in some way that actually contributes to open science, and they should be credited for the fact that they do so.
When we talk about infrastructure, we are talking about really a wide range. What's the most important aspect for you when you think of infrastructure for software?
It should enable users to do their core business rather than write software, because oftentimes researchers research and not necessarily want to write software, right? So it should get out of the way of the researchers. And then for people thinking about the infrastructures, what's important is that the longevity of that service can be maintained over a long time. And there are things that hinder us. For example, GitHub is this perfect example, but there's another one that was mentioned in the beginning of the session with Docker and Docker Hub.
Indeed.
But there are researchers who researched software deployment in this sense too, and they proposed a purely functional software deployment model, for example, to mitigate all of these problems. And that's not heard. So somehow we're missing infrastructure in terms of there are great ideas out there, but they're not being picked up on because commercial influence is bigger, because they have a better outreach for hooking people into their platforms. So I think we should try to make sure that everyone is heard from a scientific perspective rather than just throw money at advertising and then they'll know you.
The final question, and then let you off to lunch, because I know you're all hungry. So what do you hope will happen after this meeting? What do you hope sessions like this will inspire?
I think for one, a bit more awareness of all the great things that are happening. What you see for this day, it's really software from all over the research domain. So I come from biology, but I meet a lot of people in other domains. And it's really great to see and exchange actually ideas, but also problems, or even change each other's minds about particular topics. And I think that's the biggest benefit of coming together.
Okay, thank you.
I think if you look at the range and the richness of the questions that came out of this session, it really brings home to me how many people are already thinking about these issues of inclusion, sustainability and equity. And I think it's really exciting to realize that the expertise is not just being theorized from the outside, but the practitioners and the users are thinking about these issues as well. So I think what I would like to see in the future is just more spaces to join up these conversations and to create opportunities to have these conversations and reach maybe consensus or identify areas that need a bit more momentum.
Yeah, so I think I just have to second all of that. I think indeed what I hope is that all the discussions we have here today put software, but all the aspects of software development and infrastructure surrounding it on the radar. Not just of researchers, not just of the people actually working on this infrastructure, but also of funders, of course, because in the end, I think it all results about funding.
Yes.
So somebody needs to pay the bill in the end. And I think, if we can also get the funders on board, then I think we will be able to solve all of this in the end somehow.
I will have to third everything that has been said so far. But on top of that, I hope that by knowing each other more, I hope that researchers also feel free to improve the infrastructure that they use for their career as well. So you're very welcome to contribute to the code behind the infrastructure given to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, and now it's time to move on to the more unusual part of the conference, the art exhibition. As I mentioned before, 4 young artists showcased their work. Of course, since this is a conference on software, there had to be some link between the art that they showed and what's being discussed on the day. So the remit was to use concepts commonly used in research and software engineering to create beautiful and thought-provoking art. And we're going to first hear from 2 artists, Eusebi and Kuangi.
So my name is Eusebi Clota Jugla. I am from Spain. I came to the Netherlands to study art, design, technology, and I met really nice teachers and people that I ended up working with after my studies. And this actually is one of those projects I helped to. This work is from Richard Bryan. He's a data visualizer. He does a lot of visualizations with data and a lot of work for himself. And I just helped him to work on this project, which was commissioned by Media Pro Exhibitions, if I remember correctly, and is exhibited in Barcelona in the Torre Glorias. This project was about visualizing the data of the city.
The data of the city, the traffic, you mean? Or?
No, the project itself was more about the overall data that the city generates. So it was about visualizing the airflow, the air quality, but also the vegetation that it has, and of course including traffic, which is what I brought here today.
Oh, right, okay, because that's what we're looking at. I mean, the listener can't see that, but could you verbally kind of describe what we're looking at?
Yeah, so we are looking at 2 screens at the moment. What we are looking is a piece of the chapter that focuses on traffic within the project of Hyperview Barcelona. And this piece is specifically called Pulse, and is a moment where we talked about the traffic of the city. And we can see the grid of Barcelona being drawn by the trails of the vehicles that transit the city.
And so there are buttons because you know you have to have buttons.
You need buttons.
You need buttons. What do they do? You can go a little bit in, you can zoom in, is that it?
Yeah,
okay.
So to be able to create this, I used a software called Sumo, but it's a software designed to calculate traffic jams within cities, and it's not meant to be played live like we are doing here. But to be able to make this project, I had to be able to have a real-time interaction with it. So we could actually change its behavior, but its aesthetics without having to wait, let's say, 3 weeks for a new visual. So the way I like to work mostly is with real-time systems, and this is an example. And I took the software and I stored the vehicle positions in a texture, so we could read it in the GPU, and that's the graphic processor unit of the computer. And that is very capable to do a lot of calculations in parallel. So for a traffic simulation, for example, it's perfect because you can read a texture really easily. And this specific simulation, if I recall good, it was around an image of 2000 by 3000 pixels. So it's not so much. But if you would get that data through a text, it's a lot because there's a lot of data coming in. And then computers mostly don't like to have that stream of text as a data input, and it's way too much for its memory as well. But an image of 2000 by 3000 is relatively small. It's not that big. So that's the way that I actually got the cars moving in software.
It's quite interesting to have that as an art exhibition at a software conference.
Yes.
Is that the first one for you?
Yes.
Yeah, for me too. You see all sorts of things at software conferences, but not art.
I've been starting to work with art and science, which is really interesting for me. I find a lot of joy with science topics. I just like it. I think it's difficult to visualize. I think that people have struggles to understand certain topics because of the complexity that they bring. But what I enjoy a lot is to be able to take those concepts and make them more tangible.
Hello, here I'm talking to the other artist. Could you quickly introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Kwang Yi. This art is weave, so that is the idea comes from I have been an immigrant for living overseas for 9 years. I lived in Australia before I moved in the Netherlands. I'm originally Chinese. I often thought to myself if I could speak fluent Dutch and all my problems of navigating the Dutch public system would disappear. But however, when I looked into these issues, I only realized the language is only the most obvious issues. Tip of the iceberg. Below the surface, it lies many other invisible barriers, like the cultural differences, the visa status, which is a kind of a legal barrier, and then a local social network, and also unconditional support from your family, but also your connection with Dutch news. And the last is about voting. The whole installation is in an iceberg shape. So from the top to bottom, the deeper you go, the more invisible the barriers are. So we've is a project that is trying to raise awareness of those invisible barriers through data physicalization. So data physicalization is a method that uses geometry and material properties to encode the data. As a participant, you are welcome or invited to pick a thread corresponding where you come from. So if you were born in the Netherlands, you choose a blue one. If you're born outside of the Netherlands, you choose a red one. And then you answer the questions in red. For example, the first question is how fluent is your Dutch? And then how different do you find the Dutch culture compared to your home environment? And then the last one is how interested are you in voting in the Dutch election if you are eligible to do so. And then you pick up thread and you thread through the mountains, and the options are placed on the metaphoric, this acrylic metaphoric mountains. And I used the metaphors here, which the more difficult options are placed higher on the mountains. So it's also symbolized the effort you need to climb over those metaphoric mountains to reach your destination.
Okay.
When the people finish the waving, they can pick up those red glasses. So the red glasses, they will wear that. They will filter out the red text, and you will see the blue text I put under the red text, which it shows the deeper meaning behind each question. But it's also symbolized you see from other people's perspective, or see from other people's eyes.
Being an immigrant myself, I really appreciated the work Zhuangyi showed. It showed in a very clear way the barriers immigrants face when settling into a new community. The other two artists I wanted to meet were Guido and Christian.
Hello, I'm Guido van der Kooi. I'm a multidisciplinary artist from the Netherlands, and I am situated in Arnhem at the moment.
Right, so what are we looking at?
Well, this is my artwork. It's called Photocopy. I will describe it right now as 3 different videos displaying the same picture on 3 different operating systems. And they're corrupted files. So actually the compression algorithms lying within each operating system corrupt the file differently. So you have 3 different outputs of the same JPEG file.
Which is quite amazing, because I'm looking at these. Well, this is Apple, and we're opening that up, which looks very different to the one in the middle, which I think is that Windows?
This is Windows.
And that's Linux?
Yes.
Okay,
correct.
So what got you the idea of doing that?
So it started off like an exploration, or what is stored on the storage of a hard drive. And then you already get to bytes. So I opened these files in hexadecimals. It's a way of representing bytes on a computer and actually being able to kind of make sense of what you're looking at, and then corrupting these files.
So you deliberately corrupted the files?
Yes. A lot of my practice comes from the fact that I like the relationship between humans and technology, and that any machine that has led to the creation of the electronic devices that we use today are being designed and made by humans. Also, they're algorithms. And within this work, I try to showcase that even in devices that all quite work the same, can do the same stuff, still the JPEG algorithms are different, and they're made by humans.
Yes, my name is Christian. I graduated from the art science interfaculty in The Hague and now I'm a computational artist.
And we're looking at what exactly?
We're looking at an installation, or an experiment, I should say, that I made specifically for today. It's called Looking at Images, or Images Looking at Images Looking at Images. It's a bit of a loop. And I was inspired by research software, and that it is not really written to be used again, ever again. I found that a lot of this research software, it gets used once for a very specific purpose, and then the way it's created is it's not made to be replicated, and so it gets discarded, which is very relatable as an artist working with software and code also. A lot of times you build something, you have an installation or you use it once and then you never do it again.
Yeah, I think some people might want to change that. So
yeah, I hope so, yeah.
Create a little bit more sustainable software. But specifically to this art installation.
Yes, the installation analyzes the input with a camera. So as you can see now, we're standing in front of it, and there it says for you person and for me person. And then it stores whatever it detects. It's an object recognition algorithm called YOLO, which stands for you only look once, which is not, I didn't make up this name.
Okay. I thought you did that.
No, it's a state-of-the-art object recognition algorithm, and it analyzes the input by the camera and then uses that search term, goes to YouTube, because we're right now in the biggest digital archive of the Netherlands. So I wanted to work with the digital archive, and I thought, what better digital archive than YouTube? And so it uses the search term, goes to YouTube, and then shows the least watched YouTube video for that search term. So it's very random videos that are really bizarre and unpopular.
Yeah, exactly. And you're probably boosting them now.
And I'm boosting them, and yeah, exactly. Giving them some exposure, I hope.
Well, thank you very much. Christian, of course, is the artist who created the sound and music in this episode, and at the end, I'd like to play another sample from him I quite like. They're both available on SoundCloud, by the way. Well, this was a fun day, and I hope the participants enjoyed the first National Research Software Day in the Netherlands as much as I did. And thanks a lot to the organisers, who of course made it all happen. Oh, time's up. See you next time. But before I forget, this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons license. See ya.